Hi, I'm Marianne Clyde,
And I'm Lorna McGill.
and we want to welcome you to the Isn't She Amazing podcast. So, today we have a really, really wonderful guest and important topic. But before we get to the big issue of the day, which is a cancer diagnosis, I want to introduce you to my friend, Susan Allhusen. She's,
Hello.
she's calling in from Hilton Head, a beautiful home in Hilton
Oh,
Head with great family there. And I have known Susan since we lived in Tokyo together. Susan, what year did you get to Tokyo? We got there in 2000.
We got there in 2001.
2001 is when we did too, right?
Yeah, yeah,
New Year's.
2001. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay. So I've known you for a long time.
yes.
And I have not known Susan. So I've heard all about you from Marianne. So you were a runner, I guess, with her and her big
I was a
marathon.
struggling runner, yes.
We were all struggling runners. So Susan
Yeah.
and I have gotten we Susan and her husband and I and my husband were really good friends when we lived in Tokyo and became fast friends right away. And we did a bunch of things together. Susan, tell them about like the Women in Tory Day that we worked with and the marathon we trained for and the Mount
Yeah.
Fuji that we climbed.
Yeah, so we were very lucky to meet Bob and Marianne. It was like old friends immediately, and that made the stay in Tokyo obviously much more pleasant. So we did. Marianne invited me to attend a reading group of about 11 Japanese women who had been former English teachers, and they wanted to keep up their reading skills and their English language. And so they would always have a guilo, which is a non-Japanese person, be in attendance and help them interpret the meaning of the reading material. And so I was invited and I went with Marianne about an hour outside of Tokyo and met these absolutely fabulous 11 women who were all completely different age ranges, close to our age, a little bit older. And they were just so pleasant, so warm, so welcoming. And we became really a family, I would say, which is kind of hard to do in a foreign country. We visited their homes, we went on field trips together, we had overnight stays. They came to America, visited with Marianne at her home, and we went to the White House. We took them to the White House, and then they ultimately ended up coming to South Carolina to visit me. Marianne also came, and so we've had 2 visits here in the States with them. We all still correspond. Some of them have passed, but those remaining are still very good friends, very dear
That's
friends.
awesome.
That's
Yeah,
right.
it's
We
quite an
even had one of them at our happy hour, Lorna.
We did. That's what I was
Yeah,
going
we
to say.
did.
We did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because she was really cute because she was reading and she was very apprehensive, but she did great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That was
They're-
Miora's son. I don't know if I told you that, but she was
Yeah.
at, and yeah, that's how they are. They're just very friendly, very warm.
Mhm. Yeah. So what else? Okay, other than
Okay.
that, in
So
Tokyo,
then one of those women's was a regular marathon runner,
yes,
Kimura-san,
Marcel.
who has since died.
Yeah.
But she somehow, I think just her inspiration, because she didn't really ask us to join the marathon, but we
Yeah.
started thinking, well, why not? So
Yeah.
so we trained together for that marathon.
So we trained together, and Marianne successfully completed the marathon. I was actually only training for the 10-mile race,
Mhm.
which was silly in retrospect. I should have gone for the half marathon. But anyway, I was so happy and so pleased to even make the 10 miles.
Right.
It was like, I'm like, oh my God, what an accomplishment.
Right, I get it.
Yeah, so we celebrated that. Ultimately, Marianne, another neighbor of ours, and I climbed Mount Fuji. So we went up to Mount Fuji, which is kind of a big thing to do. It's a really big thing.
A little bit. Yeah.
And we did it relatively quickly after the race, the marathon, and which meant we were in good shape for the climb. And we went up in the evening and ended up staying in a little, like a hostel sort of a situation where there were lots and lots of other people. They were literally plank boards across a wall, and you laid next to somebody you knew or somebody you didn't know. It didn't matter. And then you got up at the crack of dawn before the sun rose. We hiked the rest of the mountain in the early morning hours. Well, it was still dark with headlamps, and then you watched the sunrise through the clouds. It was absolutely
Fabulous.
Wow.
fabulous, phenomenal experience, which you would never forget, never. Yeah.
So Lorna, you can see Susan is adventurous like you are.
Mhm.
And she has a lot more stuff
We
in
are,
common.
we are mutually suckers for Mary Ann's input.
Yeah.
Marianne's adventures.
Right. Mhm.
But Susan is another thing I love about Susan. There are many. I was telling her I made a whole list before the show started, but because she's such a good friend, like you are, Lorna, they both are really, really good at maintaining friendships. They just know how to be a good friend.
So what is your reason? Like, I just love, people say to me that I collect people because I love to talk to people and hear their stories. And I just met you right now, but I just feel like you and I could be friends.
I'm sure we could. I'm sure we could. So what about Mary Ann drew me to her? Is that your question?
Yeah.
Okay. So first of all, I found her very witty and friendly. I mean, you know, I'm a total stranger in Japan, and she invited me to go to this group. I mean, really not knowing how I was going to, I mean, she may have known because she knew the group, but I didn't know if I was going to fit in or not. And I think in such an intimate setting, you do have to fit. You have to be able to accept what's happening around you, be able to read the characteristics of the people you're involved in, and be kind to expressing yourself so that they did not feel intimidated by what they were doing. So I think all of those qualities drew me to Mary Ann, in addition to her sense of humor, which is a very quiet sense of humor, but it is very strong. Yeah. And yeah.
What's neat is that you both have these qualities that maintain friendships. And that's what I think Lorna's thing is. Like, she'll make people talk to her. You don't have to want to talk to her. She'll make you talk to her because she's curious, she's interested, she wants to hear someone's stories. And you, on the other hand, have a really good way to maintain friendships. You remember things about people. You, Susan, you remember details about people, and you follow through with those things.
Well, I do have to say, I am selective. I do have a lot of friends, but I am very selective. And we've lived in many countries, not just Tokyo. We've lived in many countries. And I find that there's always a couple of people that rise to the surface when you meet a lot of people when you're living in a foreign place, because all the expats join together and become friends. But when you leave a place, you can only hold on to so many of them and still maintain your life. So a few rise to the surface and they stay with you. And those are built on what the bonds that you made while you were together as friends. So even though Mary Ann and I have been apart for years now, since we both returned home, our bond is, I believe, as strong as it ever was, because, you know, the friendship was built and the intimacy was built. And now we have that as our reference point, and we follow each other, you know, as best we can from there.
That's right.
Yeah, I'm the same. I have many friends that are like that. I have a friend from high school, and we talk to each other once a month. Don't see each other very often, but yeah, it is. There are, I mean, I definitely have a big circle around me, but there are the ones that you keep closer to your heart.
Yeah.
Lorna has this one group of friends, I think it's 4 of them, that travel every year for the past 17 years. Did I tell you that?
You told me about this. It's incredible, really. Yes.
I mean, some people are so stable.
Yeah.
Yeah, we in fact we're getting ready to have dinner together on Saturday night, because when we go on these trips, but as our kids have gotten bigger, we don't see each other as much, and so I've actually been the ones like, let's like, wait, hey guys, want to get together? Like, we haven't seen each other, and when we do, we're like, we really should do this more often, but you always say that and then you never do. So I really have. So yes, Saturday night the four of us are going out, but yeah, we've had lots of adventures. We always say we're not, and I'm sure that you all probably think about this based on what you've done together, but sometimes the remember when is almost better than when you actually do it.
Yeah.
Well, then, because you can make stuff up.
And you don't feel the pain when you're climbing up a mountain or
That's
running.
right.
Right. You
That's
just
right.
talk about it later.
That's right. Well, the other thing you guys have in common is you're great moms. The way
Aw.
you
Mm-mm.
know each individual. Of course, we all know our kids, that kind of thing. But you pay attention. I mean, even as they're grown, and now I think Lorna, just in the last year, right, has had her
I'm
little
a baby.
fly the coop, and it's a really tough transition. But like Susan has a combined family of 5 kids. And how many grandchildren now, Susan?
11.
Wow.
Yeah.
11. I have
And
11.
she remembers stuff about each one all the time, and Lorna has 3 boys. So tell us, Susan, about your kids and grandkids, and then I'm going to have Lorna tell us about her boys.
Okay, well, so as Marianne said, we're a blended family. I had 2 boys, and my husband had a boy and a girl, and we have a daughter together. So yours, mine, and ours. And luckily, from the get-go, my stepchildren, who I don't consider steps at all, were accepting, and they folded right in. The kids were quite young when we got married. The ages were like 7, 8, 9, and 12 when we got married. And so we had a full house of lots of activity and, keeping them overnight almost half the time, not quite half the time, but, they live with us, vacationed with us. They're as close to me as my own children are, and I treat them and love them as my own. And my husband does the same with my children. So we don't really talk about them as stepchildren. And luckily, they were young enough to enjoy one another. And I think the one anotherness is what made us be able to be the glue that stayed together. Having the hours, she was like the little belong to everybody kid. And yeah, she had.
Dear Lauren, does she know that's how you label her?
Yeah, no, she really was, because, when you're a baby and you have like budding teenagers, and one's a girl who's going to like carry you around like a doll. I mean, she had 4 children and 2 adults smiling at her all the time, and hauling her around to soccer games. And, I mean, the child didn't have a regular nap time. I mean, she just was wherever she needed to be with everybody else. And so they fortunately are very, very good friends today as adults. And the 11 cousins are also quite close. And I could not be more, I don't know if proud is the word, or happy or grateful, but just seeing them as adults with their own children and the lives that they've made, including one another, is a blessing I can't describe. I mean, it's really nice for us. We have a big family and it's great.
That's
you?
awesome.
Yeah, so I have 3 boys, and they're, I guess, mid to late 20s. And I always saw myself as a girl mom. I really think I'd be a good boy mom. And I didn't really want to be a mom. That was, it's when I was younger. Like Marianne says, she wanted to be a mom when she grew up. I really didn't really. It was like, if I'm a mom, that's okay. But it's like, for me, it's like I always say, it was like the best job I've ever had. Like, I just love being a mom, and I love the relationship I have with each of them is different. They're different personalities and the same in some ways, but Yeah, I just went to New York City with my oldest son for the weekend, and I'm like, there aren't too many 28-year-old boys that were good. I had to be on good behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And there's a line there where what is that good behavior?
I've had to learn that line as they've gotten older, but I think I'm doing a pretty good job of maneuvering that. So yeah, it is the same. I just feel like the way they are with me or my husband, we don't have any grandchildren yet, but they talk about wanting to be dads and what they want, kind of dad they want to be. And so like, I mean, I just think like I'm when you say like the proudest, yeah, I don't know if that's really the word, but it is just like, we did really well in putting out good people into the world. And that's
Yes.
that's the legacy, that only really the big legacy that you can leave.
That's right.
That's the hugest legacy, and you guys have done a beautiful job.
Well, I do have
And-
to say that when I married Jim, I tease him that, so I was the mother of 2 boys, like your 3 boys. I really also wanted a daughter. And so I tease him that the really only reason I married him is because he already had
Have a
one.
girl. I am glad he performed for you.
Yes, he did. And then he gave me a second one, right? So
There you go.
3
Yeah, I
boys.
had just this past weekend, my middle son had a girlfriend they came to visit, and it was so nice having a girl in the house, because you're like, how does this dress look? Like, what do you think of this? Do you have, I don't have anybody to do any of that. I have convinced my boys to go to get like a pedicure with me, but but other than that, they're not going to have much to do with anything like that.
Well, that's pretty influential as a mom, I think.
Yeah,
But
no.
and also one of the other things I like about Susan, that's on my long list here of things I love about Susan, is that she really has this eye for beauty. And it's not because of the gifts she gives me, but every time she comes over, she brings some beautiful hostess gift. That's something I would have not thought to buy myself, but I love it. It's because I'm usually just happy not spending the money on that kind of stuff. And when I have a special treasure, so I have special treasures that I have that are memorable from Susan, because she seems to know exactly the kinds of things that I would like if I would buy myself those things, beautiful pieces of dishes and things like that. And she's just so thoughtful about that.
Those are what I call gifts. With my boys, we always had a conversation about gifts and presents, and I'm like, when you give someone, it's usually best when it's unexpected. Is when you say, this is perfect for that person. So yeah, I love that you do that.
Yeah, she's just so good at that. And her house has beautiful artwork and stuff. And I always like to comment that she really really puts her money where her mouth is, as far as she likes something, she will support that artist. She will, buy that bowl or that sculpture or that painting, because she really, really loves to support the arts in so many ways. And Susan, you even just told us that you're on the board of the Governor's School in South Carolina.
I am, yes.
And tell us about that a little bit.
Well, so it's the South Carolina School for Arts and Humanities, the Governor's School for Arts and Humanities, and it's a state-sponsored residential high school for the 5 genres of art. So music, drama, dance, creative writing, and visual arts. And usually it's just the 11th and 12th grade. The students reside on campus. It's a beautiful campus. It used to be Furman's campus, and then Furman donated it to them. And I'm on actually the foundation board, which is the fundraising arm that makes up the difference between what the state gives the school and what the students actually need. So there's a foundation fundraising arm that does that, and I'm on that board. And it's a really fantastic school. The kids that go there are plucked from under-resourced corners of the state, and where maybe they don't have a good art program, but the students apply and have to go through quite a rigorous application process, and they apply depending on their art form, and then they come to be selected, and then they reside the last 2 years of high school at this school. The dancing participants sometimes go 3 years just because the length of their profession requires more training. But this is a pre-professional taught by pre-professionals. All of the instructors have to be practicing artists in their craft. And so when they're teaching, they're not only teaching academics, but they're teaching these students how to use their craft and also be mindful of like a business side of it, or how they might use it in a business. And many of the students don't go on to be artists, performing artists or artists. Many of them, change when they see either they're not quite qualified, or maybe that's not the life they want to live, but they're all academically certified at very high level. I mean, the scholarships that come to that school are phenomenal, just phenomenal. So I balanced that with, I spent 7 years on the board of a hospice, local hospice, and that's a serious subject. And long before I was diagnosed, so it's a serious subject. I also was a patient volunteer, so I spent actual time with patients, hospice patients, and I thought the School for the Arts would be a nice balance between this really heavy subject that's so needed in a community and something so joyful as to see these kids get a whole new prospect for their lives. They literally will say it's life-changing for them. And so to be in this school with other like-minded artists and artisans and poets and is just life-changing for them. So to me, it was a great balance of how I spend my time.
Well, and I think the audience is getting a good rounded view of what a full and rich life you have lived, and how much you have given into the lives of other people, and how much you're happy to receive from your kids, the love and the attention that they give, because you've taught them how to reciprocate, and that's awesome.
Yeah.
And then one day, like a year and about 9 months ago, I believe, is that right?
It was July.
You went in for a doctor's appointment.
I actually went
No
in.
symptoms, right?
I was asymptomatic until a couple days before I went in for actually an emergency surgery. And so I was asymptomatic up until a couple days before that, and then had symptoms that required me to have emergency surgery. And during that surgery, of course, the surgeon took biopsies of what he found. And then like 3 days after my surgery, I was diagnosed.
And what was your
What were you
diagnosis?
diagnosed with?
I was diagnosed with stage 4 colorectal cancer.
Well,
So big diagnosis.
Wow.
holy
A
crap.
big one.
I mean, it's
Wow.
Yeah.
so
big.
totally unexpected diagnosis. That
Well,
isn't.
and Marianne and I were talking about this prior when we were talking about interviewing you, is like when you go to the doctor and you're like, you said, I've been had an appointment where I had to have like my breast exam, and I had to go back. And then, I remember sitting there and thinking, is this like the day that my life changes? I mean, is that how you felt? Or
I think every woman, probably every person, but every woman, particularly with breast cancer being so prevalent, I think we all think, there's going to be a day when it's going to be my turn. I'm going to get that diagnosis. And so my diagnosis was shocking because of the diagnosis that it was. It was so unrelated to anything that you might expect you're going to have. So it was shocking from that regard. But I think I actually received it pretty well, because it might have just been the surgery. I was still quite loopy a little bit from the surgery itself, and dealing with a new component to my life. I had to have an ostomy, and so there was that to deal with, and I think I was maybe a little in shock. I was not scared. I remember being not scared about the diagnosis. and just saying, okay, like, well, what do we do now? What's the next step that we have to do? And of course, the next step was heal from the surgery and then begin treatment. And so that's the process.
Well, that's huge, because the way of thinking that I think is so healthy, and you have such a healthy view of life in general, and your treatments and everything, is asking the question is, okay, so this is my new information. How am I going to deal with this?
Now
What am I
what?
going to do now? But let me just back up a little bit, because you said I could ask questions. So keeping the audience in mind as to, if somebody doesn't know what an ostomy is,
Okay.
do you mind telling us about that?
So when I had my surgery was because I had a blockage in my colon, and the fear was that there would be a rupture, and of course that could mean death. So, and unbeknownst, of course, to the surgeon, he wasn't expecting to find cancer. He was expecting to repair a blockage. And so when he went in, he found a quite massive tumor on both the inside and the outside of my colon, which was causing the blockage. And so he realized he was not going to be able to repair that he wasn't a cancer surgeon. And so what he did is what they typically do is they loop your colon through your stomach wall so that you now have an outlet for release of waste. And you have an appliance, which is a bag, and it's quite common. And there's lots of reasons that people get them. And they left everything else intact, taking the biopsies to figure it out. He knew right away, I guess, what he saw, but wasn't prepared to surgically do anything. And so, so that left me with the ostomy and, the healing of the surgery itself. So
Thank you.
while guess my kind of first thoughts were, well, I have to recover from this,
Mhm.
and in the meantime, which takes, 4, 5, 6 weeks to recover. In the meantime, you start the research process, who's going to be your doctor? What are you going to, who you're going to see, and what do you even look for? And, with armed with that information, actually my husband, Jim, did all of that. I did not actually want to do that. I didn't want statistically to understand what stage 4 meant. I mean, it was like, I don't really care what the statistics are. I'm only worried about how I'm going to be well and how we're going to tackle this problem. And that's sort of, I'm kind of practical in that way, is that you have to find a solution to the problem. And knowing that the solution is not going to be necessarily a good solution, you're looking for time. So basically, you're looking for, okay, how much time do I have? And my diagnosis was, without treatment, maybe 6 months, 3 to 6 months without treatment.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And you said you weren't scared at that. You weren't afraid at
I
that.
wasn't. I wasn't. I felt extremely peaceful. Maybe more even than I do now after having so much time. I felt extremely peaceful about that because it was hard, fast, and it was factual. So I think it leaves you with that. Okay, then, all right, if this is what we have, what do we do next?
Yeah.
And it wasn't like, well, maybe this is a diagnosis. It was like, this is the diagnosis. And so I think you're not really left with much choice, but just to say, okay, now let's move forward. What do we do next? And that meant finding the right team of people. And so we started that process of interviewing a couple of doctors and oncologists and looking at cancer centers and how far did we want to go from home for treatment, and knowing that there would be lots of treatment. So it's
Yeah.
Well,
basically,
that's where it's so important to have an advocate, like having Jim there to be
oh,
your and kind of helping you navigate, because It is, you just can't think straight sometimes when you are so in it.
Yeah, and he was amazing. He was on top of it. He talked to prior doctors in our neighborhood that, had been cancer or oncologists at Mayo Clinic, and we looked around a bit, and we decided that MUSC, which is close to home and doable. I actually met with an oncologist in Hilton Head, and it was like a first run, and I liked him a lot. I really liked him a lot, but I just felt like my husband happened to be on the board at MUSC just very recently before the diagnosis. And we just thought maybe his participation, not that I would get better care, but that I would get to the right people quicker.
Mhm.
And so we ended up at MUSC with a random oncologist who happened to be quite well known, and started seeing him. And then he started prescribing, a treatment protocol for me.
So the first course of treatment after you healed and spoke to all the doctors and stuff, it was pretty drastic, I think, right?
It was very drastic.
Can you tell
yeah.
us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the oncologist basically, he didn't tell me this in the beginning, but he told me after the fact that they hit you as absolutely hard as they can, because the goal is to stop the cancer from growing.
Mhm.
And so in order to do that, because mine wasn't, my cancer wasn't just the tumor on my colon, it had also metastasized to my peritoneum, which is the abdominal cavity. So there was what they call stranding throughout my abdominal cavity. Not yet metastasized to any other organ, but throughout that portion of my body. So radiation was not an option. So they had to go straight to chemotherapy, which was a combination of infusions of a very heavy dose of very nasty, poisonous, toxic, cancer killing drug, along with a high dose of chemotherapy pills that you take in conjunction with your infusions. And of course, all of them have side effects. And because you're taking them all together, you don't know really whether the side effects are from the pills or from the infusion or whatever. I feel pretty lucky. I feel like my body was in a very good place. I had been a spinner, I had been spinning for years, and was quite an active spinner. And I really feel that having done that work, didn't do much else. I wasn't lifting weights, I wasn't running, I wasn't doing anything else, but I was spinning 3 times a week or so. And I felt like that endurance, that cardio endurance, really helped my body respond to these nasty chemicals. And
That's a really good point. Yeah.
yeah, and left me much stronger than I might have been otherwise if I had been just couch potato.
Because it wasn't fun.
No, it wasn't fun. So there were side effects, immediate side effects, one of which I can only describe the way the nurse described. She said, the minute she hooked me up, she said, as soon as I let this flow, you are no longer going to be able to drink anything cold. Don't try. Because she said, I've been told it feels like drinking broken glass. And I'm
Wow.
like, well, okay, I'm not going to do that.
Wow.
And she
Maybe
was,
try it.
yeah. So no ice drinks of any sort, not really even room temperature drinks. I mean, ice kind of started at room temperature, and that was not fun.
No
So
kidding.
reduced
Wow.
in the beginning, reduced to warm, like warm or hot things. So no cereals, no milk, no dairy that was cold, no anything.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But and then fatigue, of course, you're quite fatigued. So 2 or 3 days after your infusion, you spend a few days in bed. Luckily, again, my constitution prevented me from being nauseous, like actually
Wow,
vomiting.
that's
I was
great.
not, I was nauseous, but I wasn't vomiting. And you have diarrhea. I mean, it's all part of, what the chemicals are doing inside. And what they're basically doing is they're killing blood cells, both white and red. They're killing blood cells. both the bad ones and the good ones. So the weakness comes from the blood cell reduction and the white and red blood cell reduction of cells in your body, and that makes you weak. And luckily, those infusions don't last very long, maybe 7 days in your system. And so by about 7 days after the treatment, you start feeling better. It's like you start rebuilding those cells and getting stronger, and every day then gets better and better. And I was still taking the pills, which had their own set of side effects. And that, for me, came in the form of, it's called hand and foot syndrome. And it's a kind of a drying of the skin on your hands and your feet, so that they crack and blister and are quite uncomfortable, but all manageable. I mean, I felt like through all of those side effects, I was still functioning. I was getting up, I had my family rotating through to be with me. And that was a great diversion for like feeling sorry for yourself or being sympathetic or pitiful or whatever. I feel like having them nearby was amazing. And in fact, our one daughter, who was living in Hong Kong with her family, decided to move home. And so she packed up her stuff, she closed down her businesses, and came home and moved in with us temporarily until we could get them into a house, get them into a rental.
And part of this was during COVID too, right?
This was during COVID.
Oh, wow. So
Right.
that's even scary, being in the hospital during COVID.
So, I mean, luckily I was so isolated because of my low blood counts. I wasn't around anybody but my family. And even when they came, because they came from foreign country and they were on an international flight, I mean, they had masks for, the week or two that they were here until we knew they were clear, because I really couldn't get sick.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Such a lot of things to think about.
Yeah.
What, Lorna?
No, I was, that's just as like, I mean, that just that the additional stress that you were under, and even in that circumstance, because that was so unknown. And so you had dealing with like this new health diagnosis, and all of this is happening in the world. It's causing a lot of angst in people anyway. So just even getting through that must have been just a really incredible time for you.
Yeah, I felt pretty isolated, with the exception of my family, but I also felt very fortunate to have a place to retreat, where we have a nice home, and it's in South Carolina, where the weather is decent and we can get outside. And so I really felt fortunate to be here, to be living here at that time when everything else was closed down, and I could still take a walk if I wanted to, or ride a bike if I felt like I could do that. So I just remember feeling kind of grateful for everything, even the bad stuff. I just was like, well, hey, that means I'm getting up in the morning.
That's right. And I love that about you. I mean, that's part of your character. And what I'm hearing is a lot of the strength you get physically and emotionally and spiritually comes from habits that you created a long time ago. The exercise, the gratitude, the faith,
Connection with family.
right?
I think that's true. I feel like my spiritual connection certainly got stronger, because I had to lean on. I literally said to my oncologist, I'm in God's hands and your hands, and I just am going to do whatever you tell me to do. And I realized at that moment, really, that I had no control. This was a time where I really had no control other than to be a good patient. And I really gave myself over to God and to my oncologist, and just sort of went, okay, you guys, I'm in your hands now.
Work this out, right?
Yeah, you got to figure this out. And so that of course made my spirituality stronger, because my reliance was so immediate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then how often did you get those nasty infusions? You got them like every 3 weeks for 6 months?
Every 3 weeks. So I think the nasty ones lasted about 4.5 months.
Okay.
And then I just stayed on the pills, which we had reduced. And we had seen by the scans that there was a halt in the movement of the cancer, that it was stable, what we would call stable. And so because it was stable, I was allowed to then go on what he considered a maintenance treatment, which was a reduction of the pills and off of the heavy duty infusions. So I still do get an antibody infusion, or did get an antibody infusion, and had pills every 3 weeks. And so I still had the hand foot thing and a tiny bit of fatigue, but almost really a normal life, almost really. The problem with the cancer like this is that, at some point there's going to be movement. And so you're really living scan to scan, which is every 9 weeks. I have my scans, and then you cross your fingers and hope that the results are good. And they were for a long, long, long time. And then just recently, my latest scan, which was on the 28th of March, the cancer had progressed. And so now I'm back on the heavy duty infusions. I've only had one cycle, so the buildup isn't quite as strong as it will be by the time I'm finished. And I don't really know how long I have to take it again, because we don't really know if it's going to be successful or not. So we have to wait for the next set of scans to see whether it's working like it once did, or whether maybe there's something else I have to try.
How
So,
does that, I mean, how has that affected just like how do you feel about it now, as opposed to when you were first diagnosed, and you said you were really peaceful? Like, how have you kind of like moved through those feelings?
Well, let's see, how do I answer that? It's a little bit harder. So I still feel totally at peace. I do. I feel like, and I guess this is how I felt in the beginning. I feel like my life has been so incredibly blessed that there's nothing left that I have to do. There's nothing. I could leave this earth and not miss. Oh, I didn't do that. Let me decline this. Sorry, ladies. I could feel like I haven't missed anything. I've had such a wonderful relationship with my family and friends. I've traveled. I've been fortunate health-wise my whole life, really, with no issues. And so I can't, in good conscience, complain. Now, if I were 50 and I got this diagnosis, my attitude might be completely different. But at 72, 3, when I was diagnosed, I'm like, you've had so much pleasure and so much joy in your life. You can't really be sad about this is ultimately what is going to happen. So having said that, gone 17 months with such good prognosis is cheating a bit. I mean, it's really borrowed time. And it's cheating, and you begin to take that for granted, like, oh, maybe I'm going to be okay. And then then you get the second diagnosis, which it was a little harder to take, although I wasn't fully surprised, because at some point it's coming. So I think a little bit harder to take, but no less peaceful. It just means I have to worry a little bit more about how much time there is, so that I can squeeze in all those other things.
So has that changed how you go about your days now?
Well, not really, because there were a few times that before I was secondly diagnosed, there were a few times when I would wake up and I would think, oh my gosh, I'm wasting my time. I'm not doing enough. I'm letting things go, and I'm not making lists, and I'm not preparing for, what people get when I'm gone, and like all that, like I'm just wasting my time. So we did, months and months ago, we just start re-traveling. We started and COVID it was gone. So it was
Mhm.
likely that we could start doing that again. So initially to start taking small little 2 or 3 day trips, just Jim and I, to get away. But then we started with our grandchildren again. We have a regiment where when they turn 13, we take them on a trip with us, a big adventure trip. And so we started doing that again. And we just worked around my treatment days. And so I feel like I've been in a pretty normal life, really, other than these treatments. So um, now I just have to reestablish, the days are a little different now because I'm sicker longer and I have fewer days that I feel good. But once I'm off of this again, which hopefully will be in a few cycles, I kind of know I can go back to the almost normal for some period of time. I just don't know how long.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, it makes you a little bit more desperate to pack things in, but it doesn't make me any less peaceful.
So you think your life is different in that respect than if you hadn't gotten the diagnosis?
I do. I think I would have taken it more for granted, like we all do, because we all feel like we're invincible. I think I would have taken it, not been in a hurry to, and it's no place special that I want to travel to. It's not like, oh, I've got to get to Iceland, or I've got to, get
You do
to.
get to go to Iceland. I just went to Iceland. And if you haven't been,
And
pretty
it's not,
awesome.
it's not like I have to get to Maine or there's no special place that I need to see or need to go. But just being out and being active and being part of the world, staying on the board. I dropped one board when I was diagnosed because I was on so many committees that I knew I couldn't do my job. But with the other school, I'm not as committed in my time. And so I felt like that was easier for me to stay involved in. But
Mhm.
but I've tried to actually stay, involved in the community um, and obviously with my family. I think the biggest gift that has been given to me from this diagnosis is the closeness with my family, because they've all rallied and made themselves available and rotate through on their own or with their spouses or with their kids, coming to see me or making time for me. And, that's something I might not have had, because we're all so busy and then go on
Mhm.
with their lives. But they've seen the immediacy and made it a point to be on hand. And that's been extremely special.
That's huge. That
That
is
is
really huge.
huge. Yeah.
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 Something to really be grateful for. So
Mhm.
Susan, what does the doctor say as far as, I know nothing is, he can't tell you exactly how many treatments you'll have or how much time you have in that. What does he say as far as treatments and prognosis?
He says, aren't we lucky we've made it this far? He's very happy with how I've responded to the medications, and did not see that as a possibility when we started this process.
Mhm.
So he's also grateful, but he is very quick to remind me that this is a terminal diagnosis, and so he's more or less said, let's let's try this again and see if we can get the same good results, and maybe we use this as cycling through on occasion when we need it for a while. So
Mhm.
maybe I do 3 cycles or 4 cycles, and then we come off if there's stability in the cancer.
Mhm.
Without stability in the cancer, I don't know. He'll just keep trying different drugs until we either find one that works or cancer spreads, you know. Um, it's just a fight. But but there are a couple other drugs that are out there that we can switch to, we can try. And it's all about quality of life. He's been very conscious of my my side effects and the effects that these drugs have on me, and so he's he wants to minimize the side effects as much as possible. Neuropathy is a big side effect of this drug, and that can become permanent, and so he's really wants to not keep me on it too long.
Mhm.
uh, but there's cancer to fight. So you pick if you go to the tree of side effects, I'm like, okay, I think I'll just keep the ones I have. Thank you.
You don't want to trade them in for any new ones
Yeah,
that you
I'm
don't
not
know.
looking for anything new. I kind of like what I know, the devil that you know, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me ask you how your experience with hospice has informed your experience as you experience a terminal illness. You said you were a patient volunteer at some point.
Mhm.
I was just gonna ask the exact same question.
Great minds think alike.
Well, without question, it's impacted me, and I don't know if Marianne, you remember, I was also a caregiver for my mother, Jim's mother, my dad, my brother, Jim's sister. So I've had a lot of experience with end of life care. And every single one of those people, even more than hospice itself, has made me much more aware of like how people can be and how they can accept what's going on. Jim's mother was amazingly gracious at letting me come into her life and take over all of the intimate things in her life, everything. And her graciousness really painted a picture for me of how one can be. And my mother was equally gracious, but with us, it was a little different because I'm her daughter. So it was like I expected her to be like that. But with Jim's mom, it was unexpected and was very impactful for me. And Jim's sister was, different, and my brother was different, my dad was different. But I think having that exposure just gives you a clearer picture of, maybe a little road to follow. You can either be ornery and mad and angry, or you can be accepting and gracious and grateful for what blessings you still have.
Mhm.
And I just choose that route. It just gives me much more pleasure in life,
Right.
and and makes everybody around me much happier than if I were moping around, or if I were angry. I don't really feel angry. So yes,
And
definitely hospice has helped.
so it sounds like you're creating an environment where your family doesn't feel afraid to talk to you about things. You're quite open in how you're approaching life and how you're feeling and the things you have to deal with. And so nobody feels, I'm assuming, nobody feels like they have to walk around on eggshells or anything.
No.
And that sounds like a really um, emotionally healthy place to
But
be.
yeah, I went through that. My mom had a cancer diagnosis and she was had dealt with it very much the way it sounds like you're dealing with it. And it just helped us heal through it
Yeah.
because she was so at peace with all of it. She had a tremendous faith and was always at peace. It was like it's just like you said, it's in God's hands and the doctor's hands, and I don't want to know, and I just want to live my life. And she was very similar, but I just commend you because having been on the other side of being my mom, it's always been such a gift for me and just an example of live life every day. And it doesn't matter if you have the diagnosis or not. You don't know when you're going to be on the other side. You just don't. And if
No,
you
and
wait,
yeah. And I think if you really stop and think about it, I mean, every one of us are at risk every day.
right.
So the only difference is I know it's
Mhm.
coming. I just don't know when. So, I just don't see any reason to be um, upset about that. I mean, I kind of in the beginning thought, oh, if I could make it till I'm 75, then that would be like a decent age. I could be like, okay with that. And I'm going to be there in December.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so
No, maybe 76 would be a good
yeah,
age.
now I'll just raise the bar a little bit and see if I can make it there. But yeah, I don't know. But I think it's a a true gift to be able to go through death with somebody else that you're close to, because they're teaching you. You're not, you may be caregiving, but they're teaching you and giving you in return something that you can't learn otherwise.
That's
Mhm.
true. That's true. So, Susan, thank you for taking the time to be so open and loving in your approach to life and death and that space in between. And
Yeah.
so let me just ask you too, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think maybe our audience might need to know, or that they would benefit from knowing before we close off?
I would just encourage anyone who has a diagnosis, that whether it's a stage 4 or stage 1 or at any point along the way, I would encourage them to have an advocate, to have somebody by their side, who is taking notes and helping them, and not make decisions, because we all have to make those for ourselves, but just be extra ears and ask tough questions, and be on hand for them. I think it's important that you don't feel that you're in it alone, that you have, whether it's a daughter or a husband or a friend or somebody that can be there, that knows everything. And I think that is helpful, even if they don't do anything for you. I mean, even if there's no physical something they can do, I
Mhm.
think that just the stability and the strength that having another person with you is tremendously helpful. And in my case, it's been really my whole family. So my support is very, very strong. But just one person could be the answer. It doesn't have to be many. One person.
Yeah,
That's
I think that's great advice, because you just hear, you get such a deluge of information and options, and to have somebody help you sift through that
Mhm.
is really, really important.
And even to be that set of years for you to say, is this what I heard?
Right,
Yeah,
right,
yeah,
right. Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah,
Sometimes you're like, I think I'm processing that the way I want to hear it, but it's
right.
really what I heard.
Yeah,
Yeah, because these are important conversations that you're having, and I think it's really good to have somebody, with you in that. And I mean, Jim's been with me every single time, I think, except one that I've seen my oncologist, and he's always got ready questions, which I'm like, no, we're not. We're not asking that. But it's definitely helpful to have an advocate, a friend, and somebody. Yeah.
yeah, that's
Somebody.
great advice. Thank you. Lorna, anything you wanted to ask Susan before we close up?
No, I think it's just been like wonderful to finally meet you, and just even listening to your journey. I think that's going to be an inspiration to so many women out there, because as you mentioned, we're all just a step away from being on that other side, and being able to do it with grace is just incredible that you're doing it the way you are.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I hope so.
So
And your
thank you
smile
so
is
much.
absolutely beautiful, by the
Isn't
way.
it? Isn't it? She's amazing. She's amazing. Isn't she amazing?
It's amazing.
Thank
So,
you.
and she certainly is. So thank you, Susan, for sharing everything. We really appreciate you and your friendship and your being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks to the audience, and thank you, Lorna.
Yeah,
And we'll
thank
see you again on the next podcast of Isn't She Amazing?
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.